Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome to InnerViews, the podcast where we dive deep into the realms of therapy, healing, and intentional living. I'm your guide on this adventure, Ivory. Are you ready to embark on a transformative journey with me? Whether you're navigating the complexities of trauma, embracing intentional parenting, or seeking self-help strategies, this podcast is your sanctuary. InnerViews is not just a podcast, it's a community. A safe space where stories unfold and healing takes center stage. Your story matters. And here, courageous storytelling is the heartbeat of our existence. We'll be exploring powerful themes like healing, navigating the intricacies of foster care, the strength found in survival, the beauty of reclamation, and the pure bliss of joy. So if you're ready to join hands with a community that understands, subscribe now. Let's walk this path together because the journey toward understanding and well-being starts right here, right now. Welcome to InnerViews, where every step is a celebration of your resilience and a testament to the incredible strength within you. Let's make this journey unforgettable. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you so much for tuning in to InnerViews. My name is Ivory Bennett, and I'm super grateful that you've joined us today. Today's guest, Nesta N Johnson, has a lot of juicy information to share with us. Nesta, I'm so grateful to have you here. You've shared that the amazing is beginning to outweigh the terror, which in itself sounds like a turning point. Before we get into your story, how are you arriving at this moment today?
I am arriving at this moment today in, I think, a place of gratitude that I am in my It Gets Better era and that I have the opportunity to share a story that will hopefully be helpful to some folks, and hopefully the process of telling it will also be helpful to me. So I'm excited.
That made me want to exhale because as someone who also has lived experience, I feel that it takes some time to get to a point where the good outweighs the bad, or it at least starts to feel equal to the bad. And so that's a really beautiful thing. I like to call people who are in child welfare now or who are younger than me, my cousins. So I
Mhm.
feel like it helps me and my little child welfare cousins have hope that it does get better. And some things, as cliche as it sounds, just take time. So thank you for sharing that. And I kind of resonate with that too. Okay, so if you don't mind, can you tell the audience a little bit about who you are and what is your experience within the child welfare system?
Absolutely. So, who I am is I am a human. I am a middle aged human. I am a dog mom and a happy spouse and a lawyer and soon to be a professor and a writer. And yeah, just, a human living in this world. But my interaction with the child welfare system is that so I grew up in New York on Long Island, and I'm biracial. I'm half Black, half white. And my dad was from a middle class family on Long Island. So he met my mom. He was in his late 20s, I think. She was in her early 20s in Miami. He was also a bit of a do gooder. So he was volunteering with, I think, like farm workers. Yeah, he was part of that United Farm Workers like situation. And he was in Miami and he met my mom and I happened. And I was initially with my mom, but they broke up while I was still a baby. And I was initially with my mom, but then at some point my dad came down to visit me, and this is one of those stories that depends very much on who you ask about it. But
Mhm.
depending on who you ask, I was rescued or kidnapped when I was around like 18 months old,
Mhm.
apparently. And so from then on, I grew up with my paternal family, my white family on Long Island. When I was 7, my dad remarried to a woman who was a Colombian immigrant. And she had 3 sons who were much older than I was. So that was a big transition for me in terms of For one thing, everyone in the house spoke fluent Spanish but me. So that was an
I was
issue.
guessing that was going to be a
Um,
thing. Are you fluent?
yeah, there were a lot of issues around that. And then there was also the issue that my dad means well, but he's definitely, I think, would have been diagnosed on the spectrum if he was. And so I think he really did his best, but his limitations made him sort of a wire mother.
Mm,
Like it was very cerebral, and so he decided that the best thing for me would be if I adjusted as quickly as possible to my new family. And
mm,
that basically meant that any time that my stepmom and I had a conflict, he deliberately took her side. So
mm.
it left me feeling very alone. So that wasn't like a super happy era of my life. But thankfully, my paternal grandparents, I was very close to them and were always a huge source of support for me. When I was like 12-ish, they had recently moved to California. My dad was getting divorced from my stepmom. We moved to upstate New York. And I don't mean like the Catskills. I mean the nearest major metropolitan area was Montreal, like
Oh,
up
okay.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we moved up there. And of course, most of the Black people in that area are incarcerated in the prisons up there. And you can
Mm, mm.
imagine the impact that has. And actually, that was what my dad went up there to do. So my father is actually a social worker.
Oh,
And my father went up and he was working at, I guess it must have been an RTF, or
mm.
like it might have been a juvenile, it might have been like a delinquency facility rather than a foster care. I think it was like more of a delinquency facility, but he moved up to work at a place like that. That was why we moved up there. So I like very much did not fit in a number of ways with these. It wasn't just about what we looked like, it was also about what we thought like. It was
Yeah.
just a huge culture shock for me. I didn't fit in. So I tried moving out to live with my grandparents for a year and just wild out. Like I was 14 in Northern California and I smoked a lot of weed. Like it was a lot of sex, a lot of drugs. Like I
Oh,
wasn't really cool enough for it to be a lot of rock and roll, but I was
that sounds very rock and roll to me. 14.
so that whole year was just kind of like a bit of a blur. So they sent me back to New York. My dad had got married again, and
Okay.
now he had like at the time, to me, I'm sure, I don't know that he thought of it that way, but I was very much like, oh, you have a perfect white family now. He had a daughter and then they had a son, so he it was now boy, girl, white picket fence, cat, dog. You know what I mean? Like, and I was just like, well, there's clearly no room for me here, narrator. And indeed, there was not. Um,
Oh, that is so, but you know what? So many of our lived expert listeners are going to be able to relate to that in so many ways. And it sounds like I didn't realize you experienced hidden foster care, which are you familiar with the term?
I am, yeah. And that him sending at me out to live by my grandma, like that was honestly the blackest thing my family ever did. You know, like, I like nobody had called anybody, like we weren't under investigation because they were also white people. So like,
Right,
you know,
right.
at that point that was sort of like a family solution or whatever. I don't know that I would necessarily want to pathologize that many feelings as I do have about actual hidden foster care, but then
Mm,
I came back and it just was not. I actually got placed on a pins. I just never went to school. I got
mm,
sent back to northern New York. I was back there with my dad, and I was just cutting school every day. I was like out doing what I wanted, and so the school were the ones who actually called in a pins on me. And I think my dad might have also, because I think there were two. Like my memories of this era are vague, but and I was like, I will say because I think that this is a cool detail that I became somewhat infamous on the very rare occasions I actually did go to school. Like I was a little bit legendary because they called me every single day to come to the office like Ferris Bueller. I had no idea, but because I wasn't there, but every single day, these people were hearing my name. So
you're not beating those rock and roll charges. This is giving very much rock and roll teenage lifestyle.
Just so that from my perspective, because when I was that age, I was in church and I was in school and that was it. Okay. And I was cleaning the house if I wasn't doing those two things.
Oh, there's a lot of kinds of childhoods. All right, maybe it was a little bit rock and roll, but
Okay. Listen, it
so
shaped who you are today.
that was my scenario. So finally, CPS got called because this child had not been to school in like
Right.
months. Like month. It took a while,
And you were
but
just out in the streets living life.
I mean, like this was like a very rural area. So like what one thinks of when one thinks of as like out in the streets isn't necessarily like I was out on the dirt roads, like I was out at the bonfire, I was out by the old railroad tracks, like
Right.
the swimming hole. So it was like a weirdly country delinquency.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Uh, yeah. So it wasn't quite as wholesome as Tom and Huck level hijinks, but it was kind of like that also a little.
I can dig it. I can dig it. So thank you so much for giving us that backstory. Again, you're still not beating those rock and roll lifestyle efforts with me.
I just dropped you a photo into the chat of me as a teenager, which will also, I think, conclusively, I will be not only not beating the allegations, but convicted and sentenced.
You know what? And so our audience can't see this right now, but the image is tie-dye and it is giving a very much apathetic look, facial expression.
We got tie-dye, we got a leather jacket, like I am rebellious, I smoke weeds, like I was really wearing all my feelings on my sleeve in that era.
Oh my goodness. We'll have to get this out to the audience in some capacity. I promise y'all. I'm going to try
By all means, share.
our team to share it with you.
Cover photo for my episodes, just little badass Nesta.
Maybe that'll be the title.
Right. Oh, bless her heart.
So you've described your early story as one shaped by completing family narratives, kidnapped or rescued. That is such a powerful framing. Can you take us into that a little bit more? So what did it mean for you to grow up like transracially, to be functionally raised as white in a family that wasn't overtly racist, but still not cool, as you've said to me before?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I think I didn't grow up amidst the competing narrative. So what happened was when my parents broke up, my dad took me initially. My mom was still in touch. She had become estranged from her own family in Florida at some point. She moved to North Carolina. So we were in touch with her, but not with my extended family at all, because she wasn't either. And so there were a couple of times that she came up at least once to Long Island to visit us. I have pictures and vague memories. We went at least once down to North Carolina to visit her. Again, I have pictures and vague memories. And then there were like phone calls and cards, and those trickled off. And like around, like I used to say around maybe when I was like 12, 13 or so, like when we moved from Long Island, around that was when we stopped hearing from her at all. I don't think I honestly like thought about it much. Like I would say I wondered if thinking about it now, it would be logical to be like, oh, maybe she lost track of us because we moved and our address and our phone number. But honestly, contemporaneously, I don't think I even wondered. I did not think about my mom much. I think especially because I grew up among like upper middle class, mostly white people, where most people were from intact families. Like I had this and like I was pathologized from an early age. Like when I was in kindergarten, I used to have to go to play therapy. And there wasn't like a diagnosis or a reason. They put all of the children whose parents weren't together in therapy.
Wow.
Because I guess that was unusual enough and they had enough resources that seemed like a thing to do. Which
Wow.
I don't know if it was or wasn't. I remember one time, like, I got to take my class on a field trip to see where I went. Like, I still remember her name. Her name was Mrs. Andrioli, and she was like a really nice lady. And I loved it because we played. I got to leave to play. So, like, I wasn't mad at that. But then later on, when we moved from Port Jefferson on Long Island to, at some point, my great grandma, who had lived in Shoreham, she got too old to live on her own. And so she moved in with my grandparents and we moved into her house. So that from then on, we lived on our own. We had lived when I was really little with my grandparents and then in apartments in Port Jeff and stuff. And then we moved in and I was in that school district from then on. So once I went to that school district again, they put me in therapy. And that I remember having a really negative experience with because the therapist at some point straight up told me, you would be a completely different person if you had a mother. And
what age was this?
like 6? No, probably a little, probably 8. Maybe.
That's completely developmentally inappropriate. I don't know if you know this. I used to be
Wildly.
like, that is so, I would never have said anything like that to my students. And I taught bigger kids, 12 to 18. That is so insane to me. So speaking of school, let's talk a little bit about middle school. And you mentioned it was a shock before and I relate so much to your experiences with specifically education in predominantly white areas, because that is mostly what I experienced growing up. I was in about 12 different schools, which is like nothing, which is such a small amount compared to a lot of people that I know who experienced child welfare for over the amounts of time that I did. But most of those schools were predominantly white. And with that comes a lot of microaggressions. And I didn't even have the worst of the worst because, again, I've been exposed to lots of people, places, and things. I still have nightmares about the microaggressions I experienced in middle school and high school. It's unexpected. It's unanticipated. I'm working with my therapist because I'm like, why am I still having these nightmares? It's not something that like consciously bothers me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But subconsciously, it's clearly still an issue. And it's from little things like being overlooked for being cast as a main lead because I'm Black, and being a child, you're like, oh no, that wouldn't be a reason they would like not cast me.
Yeah.
It could definitely be a reason they would not cast you. Definitely be a reason to not be picked. And just a whole bunch of little things that I think, and maybe you can relate to this too, as you become an adult, as you develop different frameworks for understanding the intricacies of racism and adversity and oppression, especially as it pertains to like identity, it just starts to click and make sense about how oppressed and how adverse your circumstances might have actually been in a way that you might not have had when you were experiencing and living them. So back to middle school, you had mentioned being called the N-word before. I've experienced that as well. And then suddenly you were made an ambassador. What did those moments teach you about race, belonging, and expectation?
Yeah, it was such an interesting experience for me because, as I said, I was raised as white, and thankfully, I did not have the experience of being raised by actively and openly racist white people. Like somebody sent me the other day the story of that Black woman who was raised as white by a white family in Vidor, Texas. It was nothing, thankfully, like that. I think what was not cool about it was just that they were not equipped to equip me to deal with a racist world. Like my grandparents, who were born in the 1920s, my paternal grandparents, used to say proudly in an era where this was not a thing, oh, all our friends are gay, Black, or Jewish.
Yeah, so it's a different kind. I understand what you're saying.
So they were cool in that sense, but I think they just were not, even if you know that racism exists, I think, and you earnestly want to prepare your child of color, which I think now, hopefully, more and more people who are transracial adoptive parents are recognizing that is a thing that kids need to learn, and that is a thing that they are at least trying to do, even if they can't fully do it because they haven't lived it. But when I was like, that wasn't even a thing that was on anybody's radars. Like, we need to teach her to deal with racism. So middle school was really when I found out I wasn't white. Basically.
Right. I mean, that is just like so interesting to think about too. Like, as a brown-skinned Black person, like, it's never been lost to me, like who I am. And of course, we could talk about the nuance of colorism in the context of this conversation and like phenotypic expression. We could talk about those nuances, but I'm wondering if you can explore that a little bit more. But before that, can I share something radical with you?
Please.
I know people are going to be like, Ivory, what the hell are you talking about?
Oh, good. Now I extra want to hear it.
Listen, and a lot of people are not going to know what I have to say, but I'm basing this on textbook definitions. I'm basing this on years of study. I'm basing this on years of lived experience. Most white people, regardless of their intentions, are racist. And if you look at the definition of racism, it's like the ability to leverage systemic and institutional things in regards to racial power constructs to get what you want in life or to hold power over another group of people. Right. And so it doesn't matter if white people have good intentions. Most of them are going to be racist because, firstly, they don't even understand racism and what it fully is. Right. Secondly, there's active racism, like you said, like they're with the KKK, they're a skinhead, they are proudly white supremacists, all those stereotypical expressions of racism. But then there's the passive racist, right? Who say, oh, I have Black friends. Well, we don't know how you treat those Black friends. Do you understand how racism shows up subtly and microaggressively? Do you speak up when you see other white people around you being racist? Do you push against actively those around you who are overtly racist, whether it be openly to people of color or behind their backs? And so I'll reiterate for the audience, most white people in America are racist as fuck. Fight me. y'all can be mad at me, but let's really look at the definition of racism and let's be really honest about it. And I think that's why, as in America, we've gotten to where we are right now, because one, people don't know the definitions of these terms. People don't understand racism as a construct. They don't understand systemic or institutional aspects of racism and oppression. And a lot of people don't even understand what it means to be white, because we could also talk about that and how different ethnic groups have been able to assume whiteness. And I digress.
You digress, but like my husband and I have been talking about how the way things are going, them Irish, Italians, and Germans better be watching their backs.
Okay, yes.
What you're putting down.
It's really nuanced, right? Because if you understand, or if you study, this is one of my degrees, basically from undergrad at the University of Pittsburgh. If you have studied race in America, you will understand that it's only a matter of time before we start breaking down whiteness into different ethnic groups. And then we're going to really see the hierarchy.
Need an other.
There's always going to be an other. And there's a beautiful saying that I love to recenter myself in this work. What is it? Basically, it's the concept that like oppression for one is oppression for all, and liberation for one is liberation for all. And so the problem with white people being racist mainly and majorly and not even understanding that is at a certain point in time, it's not just going to be the people of color who are going to be oppressed. They're going to start breaking down different identities within whiteness. And if you don't fit that, if you do not fit a specific type of whiteness, you're going to get fucking oppressed in the same way that people of color have been oppressed. And then you're going to probably be eager and anxious to understand maybe what is racism and how did we get here? And why
all of a sudden it'll be relevant.
All of a sudden.
And as I was working at the National Center for Lesbian Rights from 2020 until late 2020 until earlier this year, so about 4 years doing policy work. And that was one of I fondly like to believe that somebody doesn't have to be like you and the slippery slope doesn't have to be sliding your way for you to care about harm and oppression being done. That being said, people often do need a hook. And that is something that we were saying for a long time about gender and the oppression of queer people because, and we are seeing it now, right? We are seeing cisgender people, cisgender women, let's be real, cisgender women who are being assaulted and policed and having horrible experiences in gendered spaces, in bathrooms and locker rooms, because now they don't look feminine enough.
And I think we're already starting to see it too. And younger people are picking up on it much faster than like middle-aged or older people, in my opinion, just in terms of the emphasis on class differentiations, so many different things within the gender LGBTQIA2S plus spectrum of issues and identity expression things. And I think this recession is going to also reiterate this and highlight it and amplify it and act as a catalyst towards making people at least seek some kind of framework with which to understand if they identify as white, why they're also being oppressed in the same way that they've historically watched other people and groups of people be oppressed. But let's get back to you, Nesta.
Yes, let's get back to middle school because we could talk all day.
We could talk all day.
But yes, so middle school was when, as I said, I found out that I was not white. And I found that out. I really got it coming and going. So I had the overtly negative experience of that. I'm sorry, I'm going to talk in circles for 1 second, just to circle back to say, I 1000% agree with you on the fact that the majority of white people, I would even say the majority of people, certainly in this country, are some kind of racist or some kind of bigoted. I include myself. I am working on it, but I include myself in that statement, and being raised as white did not help. I absolutely believe that even though my family weren't overtly racist, and even though I actually do think that they might have been not only they might have been in some ways anti-racist. I feel like they might have actually been the kind of people who would have said something when something was being said in a room where none of us was there. But that being said, I also am under no illusions that they would like magically pass the Harvard implicit bias test with flying colors. If nothing else, I am sure that they had biases. So absolutely acknowledging and co-signing that. And that is why I used adjectives like overtly, because yes, that is the sad reality. And the sooner that we acknowledge that as the sad reality, the sooner it might be able to actually stop being the sad reality. But yes, so in middle school, I learned I was not white from two sources. One was a white boy who called me the N-word. And he got in an amount of trouble that I did not understand. I was not as upset as all the white adults around me, because they had all kinds of ideas and associations, not only around that word, but also not being the kind of school where people say that thing. Because as I said, I had an extremely privileged educational upbringing in the sense that, so Shoreham, New York, that school was just drowning in money. That school district was drowning in money because I think at some point they got eminent domained by the LIRR, and they dumped a bunch of bribe money at them. Sorry, we taking your land. Here's some money for your schools. And then there was also the Shoreham nuclear power plant, the little power plant that couldn't. They bribed all of the NIMBYs in Suffolk County with money for the school districts to let them build a nuclear power plant. And then Love Canal and whatever happened, I don't know the exact timelines of it all. And so by the time they got done building it and showed up with the big scissors to cut the ribbon, everyone was like, we're going to actually need you to not. They built a huge state-of-the-art nuclear power plant that never ran, operated a single day. Wow. And everybody is very slowly paying that back through their loco, through their power bills, but it was a lump sum. So my school district we had ceramic studio. We had 16 different art classes we rotated through from, like, they had mahane.
Yeah, listen, I used to be a former teacher. That is, what do you mean you had multiple art classes that cycle through? Yeah. We were happy if we had one art teacher.
Yeah. No. So that was, it was that kind of school. People going around calling people the N-word was like not done. Pearls were clutched. The strands snapped. Pearls were bouncing across the hardwood floor.
A little white boy too who's using the N-word. That was my first experience with it personally too. A little white boy.
He, like, looking back, like, he was also not like the typical, like, he was clearly, I'm just going to not beat around the bush. He was clearly a lot poorer than most of the kids in those schools. Like, he was clearly growing up in a different and more overtly racist environment than most of the other white kids in that school.
But that's a beautiful example of that issue and that intersectionality, I think, of class that we started talking about, and how when people who identify as white are in lower socioeconomic status, they do tend to be more overtly racist. Whereas when you get up into that higher middle and upper higher class wealth, becomes
nobody's racist until a Black boy want to date their daughter.
Exactly. And then even that happens behind closed doors, right? That's not something that is going to be advertised. You're not going to catch that being talked about in public, let alone a public.
They're going to find some other reason, just like random anecdote, just like the white client who was like, Miss Nesta, you can't let them place me in that foster home. They're Black. And I got to say, after a significant deep breath, okay, honey, we're going to have to find another reason why you don't want to live in the foster home, because the Black judge is not going to be trying to hear that.
Nesta girl, you just touched on something. The problematic aspects within the lived experience community. We don't often talk about the racism within the lived experience community. We don't often talk about the prejudice and the bias within the lived experience community. For the sake of this conversation, I'm going to guide us out of that. Because
we might dive back in in a subsequent conversation.
We
So
can,
that
we can
that
back-
boy, the if you will, the trailer park boy, was half of my experience of learning I was not white. The other half was one day I like forgot my lunch or didn't have lunch or something, and we had a black teacher, a
Mm.
black woman teacher, and she ended up taking me to McDonald's to get lunch. This was the 80s. You could just take children into your private vehicle and drive them off of the school grounds
in the middle of the school day.
in the middle of the school day. Yeah, that was like a thing that could happen in the 80s.
I mean,
And
it still happens now, but it's usually a very low socioeconomic status, like the ones I worked at, Title I schools.
yeah, but
And
yeah, not at Shoreham Wading River, I'm sure, anymore. And then when we got back and we were in the parking lot to go back in the school, she like gave me the ambassador speech.
Mm,
She was like, "You are an ambassador for your race, and
mm.
and your like actions reflect on more than just you." And I had no idea what this woman was talking about. Like, no idea what this woman was talking about. Like, that conversation did not slid off me like water off a white duck back. Like, I was like, I don't know what the hell this lady on. And the significance of that conversation didn't occur to me for like decades.
Oh, I hate that.
She tried. Yeah. And that was, of course, problematic in its own way, but like also was maybe better preparation for the reality I'd been living in than anybody else had tried to give me. I'm sorry, Mrs. Rochester. We had our own drama. Yeah. My apologies. I know you meant well.
I mean, but no, that is one of the problematic, I think, parts of like African American culture in particular is like making people ambassadors for the entire freaking race. That's also where a large part of people's problematic biases come from because they meet one black person and that one black person represents millions. And it's
We
just like,
contain multitudes, apparently.
and it's not fair. And it strips us of our identity as individuals and it strips us of being able to just exist freely. And when we really think about what's developmentally appropriate and what's necessary for children and young adults to thrive, it really chips away at those circumstances because you're no longer existing for yourself. You're no longer exploring for yourself. You no longer have the freedom to just be and to make mistakes and to just try and to literally just have fun, which is so paramount in terms of growing and learning and manifesting yourself and self-actualizing.
Figuring out who you are instead of being told who you are or having who you are be constrained by what you are.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden you're responsible for this huge group of people who like no, they're not accountable to you. You're accountable to them in a way, but like the group is not necessarily accountable back to you. And it's just really strange and really weird. And it's an unnecessary burden that people, I think, bear. We could also talk for hours.
Yeah. One thing I will say is that it's also wild that I would, because we know that I would, right? If I did while out in some way, if I became infamous, if I went a bad way, I would absolutely be that black woman who went a bad way. Meanwhile, I was raised by white people. I feel like I should go on their scoreboard, if anything. Just saying.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I digress. Let's move forward. Let's talk about liminal identity and systemic reflection. So you use the word liminal, being between worlds, and connect that to your work in the ABA and your MEP moment. I'd love for you to expand on that. So how did your lived experience shape how you showed up in those spaces?
Absolutely. I feel like I am such a hold so many liminal identities that my whole life in a lot of ways has been a quest for identity and belonging. And that's starting out in my own family, right? I was the only person of color in the family that I grew up with. I had that experience for a few years of being the only non-Spanish speaker in my household and being like the only brown person often in most of the spaces that I was in the wider community. But then also I never really fit in that well with other girls because I was not a girly girl, particularly since I was mostly raised by a single dad. But I also wasn't athletic, or I also wasn't a tomboy. So that was just, and I'm not sure where, I guess I'm just a nerd. I guess I just read books was where I landed in terms of that. But I'm biracial, I'm bisexual, I'm bipolar, but like baby bipolar because I have cyclothymia.
Can you tell
And
what is
like,
that? What is cyclothymia?
so cyclothymia now I think has been folded into, it might be the same thing as bipolar 2, but what it basically means is that your elevator goes all the way down to the basement, but not up to the attic. So I can get very depressed, but I have never had a full on manic episode. I only ever get hypomanic, which is 5 coffee kind of level manic, like not.
Okay, no, that helped me to understand. My mom actually has bipolar disorder, so I've experienced her my whole life with extreme ups and downs. I'm not sure which one it would be, and they've reclassified and relabeled
The
her
DSM
different
always
stuff.
be coming out with new editions.
Oh, new editions all the time. Like it's just like a car brand or something, like the
Right,
2025.
like or no, it's like Madden. Like every year, EA Games go get their money.
Yes. Yeah, and listen, please don't get me started on like big pharma and the DSM and all of these pathologized labels. We could go on for
We
hours.
could, because I actually saw somebody make a post on Substack talking about moral injury, which is now in the DSM. And they were basically talking about, they were very against putting it in that, putting that lens on it. And I had a very yes and response to that, which is in part like things don't get taken seriously until they're in the DSM. And for people who have experienced moral injury to be able to get health care to address that is a big need, and it will help with that.
Yeah.
Again, a digression, but very interesting.
But an important digression. And I kind of want to highlight, and feel free to push against this if you don't think about it, but I think about my mother's diagnoses all the time. My father also has mental illness. And one of the commonalities, my mother's not the only person in my family who has extreme mental illness, but I feel that my family has experienced a lot of direct racism, like a lot of violence at the hands of white people directly, not just verbally, not just systemically or institutionally, but physically. Like my grandmother was raped by the KKK in front of her sons, like just crosses burned at middle schools and high schools where we've attended. Like we have experienced a lot of direct racism. I'm not aware of any direct lynchings on my mother's side of my family, but I'm sure somewhere along the way that has happened as well. But I say all that to say is I'd like to think about mental health from all different aspects. And so, yeah, we have the scientific part and what are the environmental factors and what are the biological factors. But I also think that it would be remiss of me to not mention the spiritual aspects of it and the aspects of racism and how that plays into generationally the impact that has on people's not only their bodies but their mental health and their spiritual health. And if we look at certain diagnoses as responses to trauma, racial trauma in particular, it makes a lot of sense. It
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense that your mind would have to protect itself from such immense atrocities.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Like I think that I look at it like sickle cell. Like sickle cell is objectively like not a great thing in a world without malaria. But in a world with malaria, it's protected. And it's the same thing when you take some of the patterns of thinking and behavior, and you look at them from a lens that doesn't understand the stresses and experiences, then that looks maladaptive, that looks pathological, but it is actually what you need to survive the environment that you're in. Yeah, I think that a huge, and I'm not a mental health professional. I do steady be thinking about it. I steady be thinking.
I'm a mental health enthusiast, if you will.
Yeah, I'm an enthusiast. I'm a psych enthusiast, exactly. But my understanding is that one of the kind of things, one of the focuses in trauma focused therapy is recognizing and untangling the degree to which your quote unquote pathologies are adaptations, what they're adaptations to, acknowledging and honoring that, and then letting it go as no longer useful to the current you.
That's what I think I want our listeners to take away from. It's not about blaming the person who's been labeled as such. It's more about how can we look at the family systems and structures around this person? And then moreover, how do we look at the systemic and the institutional oppressions around that family system and structure that have contributed to this person needing to survive in this capacity? I think that's the perspective that we need to take, not only for big diagnoses like bipolar disorder, but to little things like attention deficit disorder or just defiant behavior or just the kid who doesn't want to stay where so and so with so and such for whatever reason. I think that taking those labels off the people and stop blaming people with mental illness for their mental illnesses and really understanding what are we creating around these people to for them to need it, like you said.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. And I remember I used to be a huge New Yorker reader. And I remember most things that I don't remember where I read it are probably from the New Yorker. But I read this really interesting article about the spread of Western ideas of and constructions of mental illness and the way that there are to some degree things like culture bound disorders and the idea that sort of mental illnesses as the way that they manifest, like phenomena can spread. Like the first, in some Asian country, I think it was South Korea, like some schoolgirls collapsed very publicly and died who was anorexic. And it was on the news, and there was a cultural contagion of anorexia and all of the. And I remember one thing that they talked about was that on the one hand, that there are pluses and minuses to the disease model of mental illness, that separating the person from their illness has some benefits, but it also has drawbacks. And the example that they gave was like in some like Islamic cultures, like schizophrenia being viewed as possession. And
mhm.
what's nice about that, as compared to the Western model, is that even when in our model, even when a schizophrenic person is doing okay, they're functioning, they're medicated, they're treated, like whatever, they are still a schizophrenic person. They're a person with schizophrenia always. Whereas in the possession model, if either the demon's there or it's not. And when it's not, you just get to be a regular person and people aren't looking at you through that lens.
Speaking
So,
of schizophrenia, it's really interesting you brought this up. I saw some research. I think there's been a few studies lately that have revealed that most people, and there's different kinds of schizophrenia, I'm sure, because again, they come out with new models every year. But essentially, what I was reading from this most recent study was that they researchers and scientists have been able to divulge that the voices that they hear are actually just multiple streams of thoughts within
mm,
the individual's head. And for whatever reason, they're not able to differentiate that from people outside of themselves. And what
gotcha.
I found to be really interesting. But I think there's also another spiritual component to that too. And I like to think about things comprehensively. So yes, we can have the scientific part of it and look at the brain and look at the anatomy. But I also think that there's like spiritual aspects and components to all of these things as well. I say all that to say is, and a lot of scientists, if they're real, will tell you this too. We just don't know enough about the body or the mind either.
No,
Yeah.
and look, like there is rational. I mean, I have definitely, I think this is in the notes I shared to you. Part of my journey has absolutely been becoming more of a woo girl.
I
And
love it. Join the
now
Woo Club.
gotten into more into tarot. I've gotten more into spirituality. I have an altar. I do ancestor work. I do all of that stuff. And that's been part of my healing journey. But I definitely think that that woo stuff matters and that woo stuff it doesn't have to be a dichotomy. And this actually, oh wow, this is a nice dovetail back to where we were when we went on our latest tangent of the liminal identities,
Yeah.
because I feel as though that's really my blessing and my curse is that I am a little bit, I always have a foot in both worlds. I'm always a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of mambo number five. And so I'm always like, I hate a false dichotomy because I'm always in the middle of it. When you
Yeah.
talk about white people, you talk about me. When you talk about black people, you talk about me. Like,
To be honest with you, with most Black people in America, when you're talking about white people, at some point you're also talking about Black people because I don't know any Black person without white ancestry. One of my great grandfathers on ancestry.com is white as fuck.
Right.
Like he's white as hell. That's on my mom's side. I haven't been able to find the white people on my dad's side.
Irredeemably white.
Yes. And so, at some point, and that's the weird, but also the kind of beautiful, cool thing about America. The rape is not cool, but the part of it that is cool is like at some point or another, we're all each other. We are
Yeah.
all holding pieces of one another's identities in some capacity. And how do we honor that? How can we find those similarities and those commonalities rather than dwelling on these ridiculous things that separate us? And I think that's where the potential beauty of America lies. I do not know how to get us to collectively tap into it.
I think that to some extent, and not to toot my own horn, but as you just said, I think that's part of the American project is that I think that we are creating people. There are an increasing critical mass of people who just don't fit in the boxes.
Yeah.
And I also think that sometimes in the queer community, there's often this discourse around like labels and boxes. And is it getting too unwieldy? When is our acronym just going to be the alphabet? And what I said once, to some applause, at a panel was that what I think is cool is that the more boxes you have, the more you have to zoom out to see them all. And at some point, that becomes a screen, right? And you can see through it. The boxes become so small that they disappear and it's just a window.
I see. I feel like people might miss that. There's going to be time to digest that. And while they're digesting that, let me move us on to our next portion of the conversation.
Absolutely.
I
But I do think that that's part of it. Sorry, just to close the loop on that being the thought is on the mental health and how that relates to the liminal identities is that I think that there's like a place for both. There's a place for sort of medication and talk therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy and the Western stuff. And also what you said about what they're learning about schizophrenia sure sounds to me like some mindfulness meditation might be better than any of them injectables. But also, like, I just think it's so dumb to draw these parallels because some of the most amazing science in the history of the world was done by devout Christians, by the Jesuits. Like, I just don't see why. Porque no los dos, because this is where I was going. There is objective rational evidence for woo. It's called quantum theory, people.
I am with you. We are vibing. I don't know where our audience is. Audience, feel free to check in. Let us know in the show notes, comment your thoughts, your feelings, send me an email. Maybe this can be another conversation for another day, but I feel you on that. I feel you on that. I want to move us along.
That was it. I put a bow on it. I am content.
But if you ever want to talk offline about that stuff, feel free, because I really do think that as our audience knows, I used to be an English educator. I've only ever taught Title I students. I've only ever taught Black and Brown students, actually, too. And what you're alluding to is the whole person. And in education, sometimes we say teaching the whole child. And so I think when we're thinking about mental and emotional health and well-being, especially in the context of like the DSM and diagnoses and medications and things, I think looking at the entire person rather than a fragment of that person is the most important element of it. And then the context of like Westernized medicine and Western approaches really is heavily rooted in what we would say the Abrahamic religion practices and perspectives. But when we look at like Eastern religious beliefs or just even non-Western religious beliefs, non-Abrahamic beliefs, so people who have religious ideologies outside of Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, they have really cool perspectives that a lot of people have found to be healing. And if we can even look into right here in America, Native American, Indigenous people and their thought processes around different pathologies and around different afflictions are really beautiful perspectives with which to understand what people are going through when they have these labels, but also how to give them coping mechanisms around them and to facilitate community understanding and support of people who are experiencing those things. For one, I believe I'm not an expert in Indigenous culture. My best friend is half Navajo, so I really love and appreciate when she teaches me things and allows me to experience Navajo culture through her. But I'm no expert by means, so if you are, feel free to tune in, or maybe we can have an episode of InnerViews on that. But for example, schizophrenia, right? Or not even, let's take it back to LGBTQIA2S+. There's something called being two-spirited. And I believe that is an indigenous belief that people are not limited to just one gender expression or one gender identity, and they can exist in multiple forms in multiple ways within one physical body, right? And so that's a really beautiful way to accept an othered identity, if you will, and to embrace that and to make it normal for people. And I think you can also see that not only in indigenous cultures here in North America. Mexico is still North America, but I remember specifically looking at a documentary that explored two-spirited people in Mexico, I believe, too. And if you know anything about Mexican culture, it can be really like patriarchal and really not accepting of LGBTQIA2S plus people. Again, if we take it back to the Abrahamic Catholic part of the culture. But for whatever reason, there was this community that really embraced two-spirited. If I can find the documentary, I'll drop it in the show notes. But it was really cool to see them just embracing and normalizing people who identify it as such. So let's talk a little bit about the second aging out, you said, and moral injury, which you've started talking about. You've written beautifully about Hippocratic hypocrisy, moral injury, and Judas goats, the idea that systems can harm both the people inside and those they're supposed to serve. So what happens to when the bearers remember and the system forgets? Can we talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I discovered in the last couple of years the concept of moral injury, which basically refers to just the spiritual and emotional harm that people sustain. It can be when they witness something, it can be when they do something, or when they fail to stop something that conflicts with their deeply held moral beliefs. And it can result in guilt, shame, and betrayal, and all kinds of really negative social and mental health. And just, it's bad news. It's bad news bears. And like many of these concepts, it's something that was initially like combat veterans to police and frontline workers. It got studied a lot in COVID because of just the way that people were acting. Like when you are a nurse trying to save lives and these people are spitting on you, that really affects how you see the world and your place in it in a profound way. And then it trickled down to other, air quotes are happening, helping professions, including child welfare professionals. And so there has been a little bit of research on moral injury in child welfare professionals. And my sort of professional journey was I graduated from undergrad in 2008 with a degree in philosophy, right when good middle class jobs, when you just had a bachelor's in anything, like stopped existing. Literally the year that I graduated with a bachelor's in anything. But I, like many of my peers, I had to move home, but I got to feel noble about it because my paternal grandparents needed help. So I moved out to California where they were then. I helped them. I trained as a CASA, as like a side volunteer gig. And that was an interesting experience. That was a preview of a system designed around the beliefs and sensibilities of white women, whether or not they were accurate or helpful. But training as a CASA led me to want to go to law school. And there was a family court judge who did one of our training sessions, was like, we need a few good people. And I was like, sir, yes, sir. And so I took the LSAT. I went to law school. I became a lawyer. And I am completely have lost track of where this train started because I was trying to get to moral injury. Right. So that's how I ended up at Legal Aid in Brooklyn. And I represented kids in the, again, air quotes, child welfare system for 5 years. Over 5 years, I represented about 700 children and youth from ages 0 to 24. And that was a hell of an experience. It really did my head in at first. And it was a journey from thinking that I was helping to really just seeing how much the system, like my own experience in foster care was atypical from what people often imagine accurately when they picture foster care of like often an urban setting, often being moved from home to home, going to a lot of different schools, being separated from siblings. I was an only child. I was in a rural area. I had exactly one foster parent. I went to exactly one school in the 3 years that I was in foster care. So my experience wasn't what people typically think of when they think of lived expertise. That is what it is as well. So I didn't necessarily go in like thinking that having the negative view of the system or wanting to like, Like, I thought the problem was that the system didn't have enough resources. Like,
Mm.
I just thought that that I looked at the statistics of how, like, the outcomes for kids aging out of care. And I was just like, oh, if we just fix this, we would fix basically all of the other problems too. So and like how I naively thought, like nobody can just say at least that they don't care about children. So you just have to frame it right. You just have to get that funding and somehow bless my sweet little heart. And I was like, just we'll get the money and we'll help the kids, and then the world will be sunshine and rainbows. And then I went and I saw what the system was actually doing. And I saw cases where it was just so clearly and actively making things worse. And like people would not let go. Like, even when we had a case and the kid had run away and been missing for like 6 months or whatever, and they just would not close the case. You know, like, no matter what, even when we were actively a stressor, even when we were actively making it worse, they just would not close the case. And I started thinking of it in terms of the Hippocratic Oath, and started thinking of, but like, how do we not even have an obligation to not make it worse, at least? Like, how is that not an ethical rule?
I have some ideas on it. You're touching so much upon, and I just want our audience to really ponder this. I always say oppression is profitable. And I like to think of it through the lens of the movie Monsters, Inc. Have you seen that movie?
I have.
Okay, yeah, me and my little foster baby, who's about to be my adoptive son in a few days, literally a few days. That's what we were for Halloween, Mike Wazowski and the other character.
Sully.
Yeah, Solly, yes, thank you so much. And so in that movie, long story short, they have an energy plant that's run off of the screams of children, right? And at the end of the movie, they realize that laughter is actually a much more powerful form of energy. I like to think of the child welfare system in the same way. It is being run and fueled by capitalism. We're making money off of these children and these families that we are hurting and harming instead of giving them what they actually need to thrive and succeed. But what we're failing to realize is that if we gave these families things that actually supported their healing and their growth and their togetherness, we would be able to make more money off of happy families than hurting families. But what do I know? I'm just someone with
No, but I love that analogy. I'm telling you right now, I might have to steal that in some conversations, Monsters Inc., because that's great. That really is so.
I think it's really true. I think that capitalism has lied to us in thinking that adversity and oppression is just a part of existence and that we have to accept it. And it's the only way that we can have certain jobs in certain industries. But I disagree.
I'm going to have to bring one back for you. And this, again, might be spicy to viewers, but remember what you was saying about the whole Judeo-Christian roots of all of this? The poor will always be with us.
All the thoughts. I'm like, okay, yeah. So if we look at Abrahamic texts and teachings, right, there is like inherent hierarchies within that. There are inherent problematic archetypes and structures within specifically Abrahamic texts. So we're thinking Christianity, Judaism, Islam, which all of them, in my opinion, have their beautiful parts, but are also incredibly flawed, as are all things, as are all religious beliefs. And I think this is why it's important to have a diverse understanding of spirituality and to talk to people who have beliefs other than yourself. Because if you don't, you won't know these things. But I have studied a lot of these texts in terms of the Abrahamic perspectives. And this is where, for lack of a better words, and to speak very broadly, separation of church of state is so important to talk about, because in America, it is so much, even though we're supposed to be the land of the free, it is very much ingrained in our cultural practices, and that trickles down legislatively as well. So not just federally, not just state level, but county level too. And then when you start talking about the nuances of, is this a city? Is this a rural area? Pennsylvania, where I'm at alone, and we've talked about that before, there's about 60 different counties. So there's 60 different iterations. Yes. And a lot of them are heavily Abrahamic, if not all of them. I think Philadelphia might have more like Islamic influence. And
let the record reflect, I am pointing at my Pennsylvania county map.
Oh, wow. Look at you. But yes. And so we can understand how these Abrahamic influences, so these influences of largely Christianity, but also we have Judaism and we have Islam, which a lot of those texts intersect with one another too, if you've studied any of them in depth. I wanted to be a minister at one point to my audience, in case y'all didn't know. There's a lot of intersection interwoven in between the three. And we say all that to say is, yes, these things are informing how the child welfare system is playing out in everyday life. And we have to be mindful of that and critical of that and questioning of that. And also be willing to consider other perspectives and other points of view. And for Black and Brown people, I would even argue going back to our cultural roots, because a lot of our cultures are community minded and are not grounded in the tenets of capitalism, which means that we innately do care about one another. We innately have an ownness around mental and physical health ailments. We have an ownness around creating healing around those occurrences too, in a way that American culture, white dominant, white supremacy culture, that Western perspectives just don't. So I say all that to say, free your mind, explore the world.
That's the end of my notes too. I will say, before we move on from this very brief liberation theology moment,
yes,
is I am on that journey. I am actually currently reading When God Was a Woman. And I will say that one thought that actually led me ultimately to getting that book was having a random thought one day that these are all desert religions. These are religions that emerged
I never thought about it that way.
Archetypal place of scarcity, abundance-minded religion.
That is a really beautiful Nesta. The thoughts you're giving me. I'm gonna have to chew on that one after we're done recording. I really am, because and this is why community is so important, because I've never thought about it in that perspective. And again, I'm someone who almost read all the books of the Bible. I really wanted to be a minister one day. I've dated a lot of people who are Muslims. So through them, I've gotten to understand a little bit about Islam. Where I live right now in the city of Pittsburgh, there's so much Jewish culture and Judaism all around. We have a lot of temples, a lot of people who share that identity, who I've grown up alongside. And I have experienced different aspects of all of these cultures, but I never freaking thought of that. And so I'm super excited to think about it when we're done, because there's just so much to that. So much, just like figuratively, like creatively, symbolically.
We had many delightful digressions. I guess to get to word vomit the things that are in my notes that I wanted to say is that I guess what I've come to recognize through my experience of the system and then working in the system is that learning about moral injury really gave me a framework for understanding what working in the system did to me and why I left. I really started to see that almost like the term that I have come up with that really resonates for me and the role that I was playing in the system and the role that I think a lot of people with lived expertise are asked to play in the system is that of a Judas goat. I don't know if you're familiar with the term. A Judas goat. So most of the domestic animals that we eat, the larger we.
I'm vegan. I'm not eating animals.
Yeah. Some of us don't, are herd animals. And so they follow a leader. And particularly in environments that they're not familiar with, they really revert to their herd behaviors. So what they used to do for many years, now it's like an architectural sort of funnily design thing. So this is largely no longer a thing. But historically, slaughterhouses used to employ animals who would lead other animals to slaughter.
Not dogs?
Nope. It would be their own, because a dog would be herding from behind, and that they don't want. And again, this is a rich metaphor. They don't want the animals to be unduly stressed because that taints the meat. They want them to go calmly to their deaths. And so they are led by someone they trust instead of chased by someone they fear.
What is coming to mind, and I'm sure you've heard this quote before, if you were silent about your suffering, they will kill you and say that you enjoyed it. So many metaphors, so much symbolism. That is a really
Yes. So my current project is I am doing something. It's maybe a book, maybe a longer piece. It's definitely an oral history project. I want to gather the stories of other Judas goats, of other people with lived expertise who went into the system to help and were weaponized against their own herd, if you will. And
Oof.
yeah, so I am, hopefully by the time this comes out, I'm working on getting together like a Google form or a QR code or something that you can share with your listeners, because I would love to start talking to people about this. And I I do want to say, in connection with that, I would love to try and find some level of funding for that, because I do think that lived expertise has value. I, as a person with lived expertise, have been tokenized and exploited, and I'm still learning. I still have people wanting to pick my brain in LinkedIn messages who run like big fancy foster care apps that are, like you said,
I
sucking
know.
money out of these families, and they're sucking knowledge out of my head so they can suck more money out of these families. And I
I know.
still sometimes want to share because I want to help, and they don't want to help, and they don't want to share.
And they
Uh,
don't even want to pay you
and they don't
to
want
get
to pay
paid.
and
They
budget
don't
some
want to pay you.
value my experience, then you can budget for it. And
Mm.
that's the second age out that I referenced. I don't know, because like you said right at the beginning of this, it takes a long time to process one's experiences in this system. And I steady do not understand even the quote unquote good orgs, the people who are doing the quote unquote good work, when they're recruiting people with lived expertise to share their stories. It's always 18 to 30. They always want people 18
Please,
to 30.
please do not
It
get me started on
takes
that.
longer than that.
It takes longer than that. It takes longer than how old I'm 35 now. It takes longer than 35. And there's layers and levels to this. I feel so. I told you earlier, I think off camera, about I'm becoming an adoptive mom in a few days. Becoming a mom has pushed me into another level of understanding and given me a different framework with which to understand my lived experiences. And so moving from being an adoptive kinship foster mom to like, this is going to be my baby in a few days, that in itself has really changed the way that I've experienced the 17 years in foster care that I experienced. And
Mm,
people, when you said they want to hyper focus on fucking 18 to 26, that's really what it is mostly. 18
mm,
to 26, what the fuck do they know? They're
right?
still there. They're still in that shit. At
Yeah,
35, I feel like I'm just getting far enough away from it to be able to take a deep breath.
take a breath. And yeah, so it's wild. Like, it's wild that, like, even that is part of the false narrative. Like, even that,
Yeah.
like, you would love to think that what you do to people is fixed by the time they're 30, wouldn't you?
No,
You would
not at
love
all.
to think that
Not at
you are
all.
not causing lifelong harm. So,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. That intergenerational aspect of the work and aspect of narrative storytelling is so important. And I just want to say I try to push for it as much as I can in the work that I do at Youth Voices Rising. Even though it's Youth Voices Rising, I try to get people of all ages across all generations to share, because there's so much more to the story than what 18 to 26-year-olds can even
Yes.
begin to understand about their own lived experiences to tell us. They do have really important stories to share, but their perspectives will indubitably change as they age and as they get further away from that lived experience. And
Mm,
I guess I was forcibly aged out at 21. So I've been out of the system technically for 14 years now. And I'm just now starting to feel like it's not a major aspect of my identity and who I am.
mm,
Almost freaking 20 years later.
yeah.
That's I want people to really pause and think about that. It takes a very long time, for lack of a better words, to deinstitutionalize yourself before you
Oh,
can even begin
absolutely.
to unpack and understand what you've been through. And that negates having the framework with which to understand it too. Because
Mhm.
me and you have both done a lot of work within the sector of child welfare, for lack of a better terms. I've done a lot of advocacy. I've done a lot of educational stuff, which has a major crossover with social work stuff. You've talked about being a CASA and being a lawyer. So innately, we've gotten to be exposed to a lot of the jargon in the industry, and we've done a lot of the work alongside of those in the industry. But if you aren't doing that, it will take even longer for you probably to understand what you went through, what you experienced, what was good about it, what was bad about it, what was fucking terrible about it. And then also, how can people make it better for those who are still going to experience it?
Well, I absolutely think that there is a place for a 22-year-old who just aged out last year to say what would have helped them, what would be helping them right now. But
Absolutely.
also, yeah, you need to be like, they are not far enough away from it to be able to speak on every aspect of how it has impacted them. And I
My,
think this is tangled up in Western values too,
Mhm.
right? Because the idea of youth, the idea, like,
Americans are obsessed with
where's the
20-year-olds.
crone? Is the crone the archetype of the wise elder? Like, why are we not?
America is obsessed with people in their 20s. One of my dreams with Youth Voices Rising and the work that I do throughout my entire life is to capture longitudinal narratives. And yes, I want to hear what the 20-year-old who's transitioning out of care has to say. I want to hear what the 21-year-old who's officially out of care has to say. Let's follow up on them every freaking year and see how their
Yes,
opinions have shifted and changed. And then let's look at the differences every 5 to 10 years, because it's going to be different. It's going to be informed by whether or not they engage in parenting themselves. It's going to be informed by if they develop any health ailments that we know they're at higher risk for because of something called ACE scores. If you haven't heard of adverse childhood experience,
yes.
of course, we can
I
acknowledge.
like to say I have a full hand.
Don't we all? Like, geez Louise, please don't get me started on that. Because I will go down that rabbit hole very quickly and very intensely. But it's definitely important to look at the story over time and to see how it shifts and changes. And that's why that intergenerational approach to this work and to advocacy and to storytelling is crucial. And in my opinion, an important and unavoidable part of this storytelling. If we're going to tell the story, we got to tell all of it.
Yes. And it's part of the healing. Telling the story itself, the process is part of the healing. This conversation, thank you, has been part of my healing. Because
Yeah.
we talked earlier about how my lived expertise in a lot of ways was very unlike other people's. And people who come to me as a lived expert might think that I have all of these experiences from being in foster care that I didn't actually have due to the only child, one house, one school situation. And that, I think, also presented an issue, and it was its own kind of weird in the middle liminal identity, because I think that when I was in that era, when I first started working in that system, and I had that wide-eyed, we're going to fix it kind of mentality, there were other people who also were professionals of color with lived expertise in the system who had more typical experiences, who saw me sometimes siding with the agency and being like, what the is you doing? And I couldn't understand why. I'm thinking of one attorney in particular where I could never understand why she just hated me.
Ugh.
I get it now. Oh,
Yeah.
I get it now. She saw me for the Judas goat that I was so long, but she didn't understand that I grew up in the damn slaughterhouse. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? It's not like I grew up in the herd and showed up one day asking for a job. You know what I mean? So that was its own journey. Embracing my being a Black person, figuring out in middle school that I was Black and getting to where I am now, that was a journey. I went to an ABA event a couple of years ago where Joyce McMillan, JMac, was like, all right, I want all the Black and brown people in the room to stand up. And then she said, now I want all the brown people to sit down. And I sat down, and my friend next to me was like, what the fuck is you doing? I get it. I'm telling you, I get it both. And no matter what I do, I get the what the fuck is you doing? You know? And I mean, I think that, and part of it has been absolutely like a physical temporal thing, because when I was younger, I was a brown girl. And now, and it was so interesting seeing the difference in how it was treated depending on who I was with.
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
if I was with a Black person, then I was a Black person. But if I was a white person, I was an exotic, dusky beauty. Sri
Mm.
Lankan, maybe. So that was real interesting. And I remember expressing this to the wonderful folks at Movement for Family Power, who do incredible healing work for those of us who have experienced these various injuries. And I remember expressing this and one of them just saying to me, "You look like a Black woman to me." I almost cried.
Oh,
Almost like in that moment, I almost, that was such a healing thing for me to hear. Just that I look like a Black woman was honestly an amazing moment for me. And I have had other moments like that. I had a moment at, I think it was Creating Change. I think it was Creating Change conference where they had a caucus specifically for biracial, bisexual people.
oh, okay.
Yes, it was a room full of liminal identities, and I felt a sense of belonging like I have never felt in my life, in being in a belonging finally in a room full of people who also didn't belong. And
Mm,
that was an incredible experience. And what I'm learning about moral injury is that the cure for moral injury is it's a spiritual injury. And the
mm,
cure is also spiritual. It's redemption, it's restitution, it's restoration. It's actually helping. It's doing the actual helping you thought you were doing, and you were actually harming.
it's
And
yeah.
slowly, through becoming more of a woo girl, becoming more in touch with and honoring my ancestors. I talk to my mom now. Oh, I don't know if I mentioned this at any point, but my mom passed. My mom passed when I was 15. I didn't find out until I got back in touch with her side of the family many years later.
Sorry.
I am connected with them now. I talk to my mom's mom, my grandma every week, just to put to tie that, I guess, for any curious listeners. But so I do have a connection to that side of my family, and I do talk to my mom regularly. And I do think that's another aspect of what the harm the system does that isn't talked about, and adoption as well, as the idea of ancestors and the
Mm,
importance of ancestors in our culture and historical culture, and the disconnection from that, not only with living relatives, but so I'm in a very liminal moment as the ultimate liminal girl. I'm also a Libra because, of course, I am.
that makes so much sense. Like for anyone who understands astrology, like of course you're a Libra. Duh. Could you be anything else right now? And like the entire structure of this conversation, but
Yeah,
only the woo girlies and guys are gonna get that one.
right. The Libra is the only thing I am not liminally. I am full Libra. I'm still very figuring it out. I have been incredibly, I live in interesting times, and I always have. And this year has been no exception to that. I was laid off from my job at NCLR earlier this year. They had to lay off the whole policy team for funding reasons. And it turned out to be the biggest blessing.
Mm,
It stopped being my job to read the news at the exact moment when reading the news every day probably would not have been something that I would
mm,
have been able to successfully navigate vis-a-vis mental health. And I started my own small consulting business. I teach, I speak, I read, I write. The most amazing things have happened to me in this year. I'm paying the bills, but which is huge. But I have been paid to write a thing like that will be coming out with Smith College, like a reproductive justice thing, talking about some of these threads,
yeah.
for sure. But I'm
Great
also going to
press.
be a professor. I will be teaching gender and sexuality in the law at Penn Dickinson as a remote adjunct this coming spring. I was the second lead author on an op ed that just came out in the American Journal of Public Health a couple of weeks ago. I am thriving. Like I am free and I am setting my own schedule and I am like living the life that I want to live with my happy snoozing dogs behind me. And like my little life is going okay. And I am so aware and I am trying to do my little things for the little people around me. We've got our little Planned Parenthood and our little NEPA action and our little queer youth shelter. And I'm trying to really be more local because I don't know where exactly I fit into the movement. I'm always going to be an advocate for children, I think, first and foremost. And that brings some tension sometimes, although I think that there is a great deal of overlap, far more than the system acknowledges, in the interests of children and their families and their communities. But I know that litigation and policy and working at nonprofits is not my road forward. It's not my fight anymore. I did my time. I thank you, Jesus, got my PSLF in January. And
Congratulations.
again, many a blessing,
Yes.
many a blessing. But teaching is exciting. I know that young people continue to be just so inspiring. And I just, all of the crap of adults, like the urge that led me to want to work with young people, and that belief that if we want to build a better world, we have to start with children. And we just have to start with giving children childhoods where they have everything that they need to thrive, and they are safe and they are loved, and not like safe in this shitty child welfare system way, but really safe, like spiritually safe, like safe from having to have somebody lock them in a car with a bag of McDonald's and tell them they have to be an ambassador for a whole race.
Yeah.
Safe from all of that. But I was named after Bob Marley by my white father, Robert Nesta Marley. And I think that redemption song, I'm in my redemption song era.
Well, Nesta, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for being here. I truly appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable, and I've learned so much in today's conversation. I hope that we can connect outside of this for sure, because there's definitely a lot of like similarities in our journeys. And so if you accept being my cousin, I will accept you as a cousin, and we can
Absolutely. We are family, the in-laws and the outlaws.
listen. We're totally. I have to ask you though. I ask all of my guests who are lived experts these 3 questions before we go, if that's okay.
Okay.
So, what changes do you hope to see in the child welfare system in your lifetime?
I hope to see it focusing on love first and foremost
Mm.
as the biggest need that children have.
Snap, snap for that. Overall, what advice do you have for people with lived experience?
Breathe, let it, give it time. Give it time. Like, you can't always force healing, right?
Mhm.
Like, mental healing is just like physical healing. Yeah, you can and should, right? Clean it, put some Neosporin on it, don't let it fester. But right at the end of the day, there's nothing that you can do once you've done that. It's got to heal. So give it the time and the space, and like, just be kind to yourself. Like, you've been through a lot. You have been through a lot, and every day that you get out of bed is a victory. Or
Mm.
don't get out of bed. You can rot sometimes. That's cool too. Try to get out of bed most of the day.
I love that. There's just so much wisdom in that. And really quickly, I keep thinking about like 10, 20, 30 years from now and how we'll get to be the older elders. Because I don't know about you, but I've never really gotten to talk to someone who was like in their 80s or 90s who would live child welfare experience. That's a
Me neither, actually.
Yeah, that's a part of the story that I don't really have. And but we'll be that one day, like hopefully. And that's exciting because we'll get to close those generational gaps, and we'll get to be that intergenerational liaison, if you will, and sharing like, oh, this is what it was like in the 90s.
I was recently introduced by the amazing folks at the JMAC. They have the Repeal CAPTA working group that I'm a part of, and it is the Zoom that I get to be on a bunch of Hollywood squares with a bunch of predominantly amazing older women of color, and it is healing in that same way. I have, whether they want to be or not, they are all my aunties.
Yes. They know it. This is just, it's just a part of a Black woman training course. You already know you're an
All right. Yeah.
I love that. Okay. Our final question. And again, I just want to thank you so much for our time together today. Let this not be the last conversation that we have. Thank you for your transparency, your vulnerability. I'm sure this is going to touch our listeners in a really important way. And if y'all want to get in touch with Nesta, you want to work with Nesta, you want to peruse her work, feel free. The information is going to be in the show notes. You can reach out to her directly or to me, and I'll connect you back to her. But thank you again for tuning into another episode of InnerViews. So our last but not least question, Nesta, who are you without the trauma of child welfare?
I am the woman clothed in the sun.
And on that note, thank you all for tuning in to another episode of InnerViews. My name is Ivory Bennett. You've been listening to our guest today, Nesta N. Johnson. We look forward to hearing from you soon. The InnerViews podcast is a production of the Safe Camp Audio Network, which is a division of Youth Voices Rising via Fostering Media Connections.
Please visit safecampaudio.org on the web or Safe Camp Audio on all major social media. This podcast was produced and mixed by Christine Onjoko. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you consider sharing, subscribing, and or giving us a 5-star rating on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcast.